Welcome to another episode of Behind the Now. Today I get to chat with award-winning actor, producer, and director James Pratt. Originally from Australia, James started his career studying acting at NIDA. A few of James's many awards include Best Actor at the LA Film Awards, Best Director 2022 at the Cannes Film Awards, and Best Actor at the 2022 Beyond Hollywood International Film Festival. Listen in to learn about James's early days of making a $200 short film in outback Australia that led to a deal from NBC Universal. Yes, you heard that correctly. And so much more amazing work and experience ever since. Hey, James, thanks so much for doing this and talking with me today. I'm so excited to talk more with you and learn more about your work and life and everything. So thanks for being here.
Thank you very much as well, Jenna. It's awesome to be here.
Yeah, of course. Okay, so James, you're an actor, producer. You also write and direct. I know you have so many feature films that you've done, and you've been in the festival circuit. You have all these films in the pipeline. So before we get into any of that, just how did you get into entertainment at all? Like, was this something you always wanted to do and you just, or did you do something completely different before? And yeah, what's your story? Where does it start?
I think like the best way to describe it is, when you see like a movie like Crocodile Dundee, like back in Australia, it's not quite like that, but growing up, there wasn't really, because I'm from Australia. Growing up, there really wasn't that sort of like entertainment sort of factor. It was a lot more like beaches, surfing,
Right.
you know, in the country, like
Yeah.
Crocodile Dundee without the crocodiles and the craziness. But so I guess a very different lifestyle to kind of Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Uh,
So
and
culturally, totally different. Not even like, so it wasn't even on your radar, it sounds like.
Pretty much, yeah.
Okay.
Like it wasn't until after high school where you kind of had to like look into things and be a little bit more of like an adult. Like, hey, like what are you going to do with your time? That I started to realize that yeah, I really do enjoy being creative, but it's again, it'll probably mean having to move on and like different locations and things, and eventually leave Australia to really pursue it.
Okay. Amazing. So you went, so you grew up in Australia. Where in Australia?
I grew up in Sydney.
Oh, okay, cool. I have family from Australia, Sydney. Yeah. Okay, so you did school there, everything, and then after high school, you came to LA with the mindset of pursuing acting, or where was your head at? Like, did you just come on your own, not knowing anyone?
My first impression of LA, I always like I spoke to someone else about this. It was kind of funny because when you kind of like you're young and you're a little bit naive and you see like I'd seen like Beverly Hills 90210 and Baywatch
Uh-huh.
and Melrose Place, and they kind of show off parts of like LA, which is like picture perfect,
Mhm.
kind of like Beverly Hills Cop when he goes to Beverly Hills from Detroit. I just remember flying into LA and it was just like wall to wall concrete, and I was kind of like, because when you look down on the plane, it's very like wall to wall concrete.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I just remember like getting off the plane and just a great vibe. Like I really love the vibe. Like
Okay.
Everett's an ambitious town.
Mm.
Uh, and I just remember like straight up the guy who like drove me to the hotel. He's like, yo man, I'm an actor too. Like, and it was this kind of like just realizing, hey, like there's a lot of competition, and
Yeah.
like everyone seems to be plugged into I guess the film scene in some way, whether they're a valet or a advertising
Yeah,
exec.
isn't that crazy? It is such a unique place. It's weird, you know?
Oh yeah.
That's very true. Yeah. That's, like, unlike anywhere else where in the world, you know?
Oh yeah, definitely. Well, I remember like it was also kind of cool because this guy had like some super motivating stories.
Mm.
His advice to me was because I said to him, I was like, yeah, like I'm sort of just I'm out here, I'm new in town, and he was a great dude. Like he was telling me that he'd had a scene, and I don't want to sort of like uh, trying to make sure I remember correctly. Luke Wilson, Kate Blanchett. I think it was Luke Wilson, Kate Blanchett, and someone else was in a
Okay.
scene that he got to do, and he's kind of
Okay.
like just experiencing that airspace of getting that. He's like, that was like a highlight for me. And then his other highlight was, yeah, like never date an actress in this town. And
Yeah.
he said it with he said it with like that. If there was one thing he was going to tell me that day, like about LA, like bring me
Yeah.
back, it was like, do not date an actress. And obviously, he had some strong.
Horror stories.
There's definitely something behind the scenes with why that happened.
Yeah. Ugh, that's so funny. That was like your first experience in LA, like arriving at the airport. That's your Uber driver you're talking about?
Yeah, well, he was a
Oh my
taxi
god.
driver at that
Okay.
point.
Huh.
Yeah,
All right,
um,
right. I just said Uber, but like, yeah, taxi.
yeah.
Okay.
My first experiences with someone telling me, "Do not date an actress."
Okay. Have you stuck to that? No, I'm just kidding.
Well, everyone in this town seems to be an actor or an
Yeah,
actress, so
yeah.
it's
No,
kinda
I'm
like,
kidding. No,
yeah, his
yeah.
advice was very hard to follow over a long period of time.
Yeah. Um, yeah, totally. So, okay, so from there, you're new. You have aspirations originally. It was your first thing to be an actor
Yeah, so I
originally. Okay.
mean, originally to be an actor, I mean, that was what I'd studied in Australia. I went to a school
Okay.
called NIDA, uh,
Oh, cool.
which maybe you've heard of.
I think so,
Um,
actually. Yeah.
yeah, it's cool school. Yeah, like maybe Mel Gibson and Kate Blanchett went there, and like
Okay.
a
Yeah.
lot of the Australians that you might have heard of sort of go there. But yeah, I mean, I'd had the training with acting and really wanted to sort of pursue that. But I mean, as I sort of mentioned earlier, I kind of just love being creative.
Yeah.
So you kind of want to use as much as you can in the day.
Totally, and, like, you realize how valuable that is. Like, it's amazing that you produce and direct as well, you know? So when you first got to LA, you didn't know anyone, you meet this, taxi driver who's an actor and telling you some advice. So then from there, like, what did you do? How did you get any momentum going in terms of acting or yeah, I know you're incredibly creative and talented, not just acting, but producing. So, like, yeah, just what did you do? What happened? What was like the first thing?
I think kind of just starting to I mean, it's hard to sort of pinpoint one thing, but I think mainly
Yeah.
the main thing is just to I was networking a lot and I was open to opportunities. Like obviously,
Yeah.
like professional ones, not someone says, "Hey, I'm making like a short film with my iPhone in the car park," so
Yeah.
which kind of sounds cool, uh, but
Totally.
just I think the best way to put it is like I'd come from Australia, and usually Australians when they get to LA, it's like a 12, 13 hour plane ride.
Mhm.
They're there because they want to work rather than
Yeah.
just use it as an opportunity to kind of have fun and just enjoy life. I feel like yeah, there's definitely like a work side that sort of plugs you in being Australian.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So even just like talking about networking, what was I'm sure it sounds like it was probably pretty organic. Like you just met people and then met other people and like told them what you want to do. But Um, yeah, like, what happened there? Did you, like, get into class here or, like, just what was yeah, how did you meet people?
I think like the main thing is like a little bit of everything.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, I guess looking back, like probably something that I thought was good, like which really helped, was making conversation with people, even if it's just like a 3 minute conversation,
Yeah.
rather than just being like in the lift, hypothetically you're in an elevator with someone, or you're in a at the time, like Uber Pool just launched at one point when I was there, and it was surprising, like the amount of people that were getting Uber Pool that you could
Yeah.
connect with, um, and just on top of that as well, like I think when you want to work, like when you want to you enjoy doing what you're doing, I think
Mhm.
you attract like-minded people too.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. That's so true. And you also brought up such a good point that, like, you forget, like, things like Uber Pool and, like, just little things on your day to day to actually to just connect with people. Like what you said, like a 3-minute conversation, you just never know, you know? In an organic way, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then Okay, so then were you, like, auditioning and that sort of deal?
Yeah, like a little bit of everything. I
Yeah,
think my experience of LA as well was um, I think half of it's exploring because you obviously have like so much in LA to kind of like choose from, whether it be
yeah,
like beaches or Runyon Canyon or you know, but it's also at that particular point where it's like you want to work, so it's
yeah, yeah,
learning new skills so you become valuable to people making a film. And I think that was like another thing I really enjoyed is once I got behind the camera, just having like a skill and learning. So your business model in LA was definitely not like, sit at home, wait for the phone to ring or wait for
yeah,
your agent to
totally.
call. It's kind of like, hey, like, I can actually produce and I know how the mechanism and I know how it works. I know why I'm not getting auditions. Because I think
Mm,
one of the things that really blew me away is I early on, like, when being an actress, it's like you get really close to a role or it's like between you and someone else and you kind of ride that roller coaster, which only you get to experience as well. It's hard to
right,
describe that to people, but a lot of the time it's just so not up to you right from the start. Meaning,
right,
like
right.
like to give you an idea, like if they're shooting a co-pro in Vancouver or Canada in Toronto, uh, it's like part of the reason they're getting that tax credit is if they cast some of the leads or the director, but if they're the leads, they have to be Canadian. So
Yeah,
it's like
it's
a lot
funny
of
you
the
say
time I
that,
think, and that
yeah,
sort of echoes to other parts as well. So I know like a lot of people too have had where they've been down to the final few, and they're going to be shooting somewhere else, including Australia.
yeah,
And it's like at that particular point you got to be open to the idea that they're not going to cast you because they haven't hit enough of the mandates. Like the script writer was the script writer from Canada, was the hypothetically the director from Canada. They haven't hit enough yet, and they're going to need to cast the leads as from that country because they're going to save 30 to 40% of the budget. So
yeah.
I think that's
Wow,
what, yeah, that's where
that's
you kind
so
of learn.
you're right, like, that is so interesting to know those kinds of details, like, even when you're thinking of that, I can think of, like, several projects, like, one was literally Canada, one was Atlanta, and then I, like, look and it's
Right.
like, yeah, you were, like, down to, like, pinned or supposedly down to, like, a few, I don't know, who knows, and then you look at, like, "Oh, who got it?" And then you're like, "Oh, wow, they happen to be where they're filming." Like, that
Right.
happens a lot,
No,
yeah, and you're this is the
yeah,
first
and it's
time I'm hearing that. It's
yeah,
like
and it's
yeah.
that thing too where it's like, obviously, the casting director's not gonna say that to you when you
Yeah,
walk in
right.
the room, like, "There's a
Yeah.
chance we're gonna need to go with a local hire." They're not
Right,
gonna
right.
say that, but it's just knowing that so that, when you're on
Right.
this ride, you're not you're not kinda, like, second guessing yourself the whole time, or you're not
Yeah,
acting
totally.
out so surprised, yeah.
Yeah, that speaks a lot to, like, just the mentality that's valuable to have because there's so many factors beyond our control as
Oh, yeah.
actors, like, so many, and that's just, like, what you just pointed out is, like, one detail, but there's, like, so many things on top of that, that we're just unaware of.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so okay, so how did you get into so you realize that sort of thing, and is that what kind of made you go into creating your own content and producing and all of the above? Or yeah, how did you get into that? How did you find the right people to start doing that? What was kind of like your first film too? Like if you want to use like specific experience, like how it started, like how
So
what yeah,
yeah, no, and it's a good question because it's again like everybody has their own individual sort of story, how they went in. Uh, Probably the first time I guess you could say, like I stepped more behind the scenes was I'd finished acting school. I was in this small country town in Australia, and I decided
Mm,
to make a short film.
okay,
And it's a great idea when you're like that age. You're like, oh, it's a great idea. I'll make a short film. You have no idea about like logistics and like
right,
like the post workflow and things like that. But uh, I found out very quickly that you're in a small country town with like hardly anyone that lives there. Um, there really isn't like a film crew that you can hire. So it sort of
okay,
forced me to, and this happened again during COVID. but it kind of
Mm.
forced you where you had to wear all the hats, where you had to go, okay, well, I'm going to have to act in it because, no one here can do an American accent, and I would like it to be American, and I don't have, anyone that's been a cinematographer. Basically, I made this $200 short film. The $200, about $100 was for catering, and the other $100 was for the camera gear, which
Okay.
um, everything else. And you do find like in these, country towns, and I find away from city areas, people are just so awesome. Like they'll
Yeah,
give you a
that's cool.
location
Uh-huh.
without worrying about, oh, well, I'm going to miss out on this much income if I lend you my, golf course tee off, it's like, you're going to have to pay me this much. It's like I find like people a lot more genuine. So made this $200 short film. Was writer, director, actor, producer, like everything. It was pretty bad, but it
Yeah.
had some amazing cinematography in it because it was shot, in the middle of nowhere. Like, so when it was a sunset, it was like straight out of Dances with Wolves sort of
Wow.
landscape.
Wow. Yeah.
Um, and it was also very pure because you had like real dirt roads that when a car drove, that dust would stay in the air.
Mhm.
Um,
That's
it
amazing.
yeah, it ended up doing really well. It got into NBC Shorts Fest.
Yeah. Wait, what? You just said it was really bad, and then you're
Well,
like, it
like,
ended up doing really well.
well,
That's crazy.
this was my hunch. I got the feeling that they got all these like very good. Well, the entries would have been very good, but and they see this one film that's kind of shot in the outback of Australia, and I get the feeling they would have been like, wow, like this must have had a budget to it, to get
Oh,
to this
like they
location.
flew everyone there,
Yeah,
sort of.
like
Yeah.
yeah, and because in one scene, and this was by no chance, but there was like a crop duster plane that was like spraying some of the canola fields, and the fields were like 1,000 acres, but the plane went really low, and it did a couple of passes, but it looked like we put the plane in the film. So
Was
it
it
was like,
Yeah. Well, you mean it was like a plane happened to fly. You didn't
yeah.
have
So
anything to do with the plane,
oh
right?
no! So we were shooting
Okay.
in this
Yeah.
canola field to trying to get the first light,
Yeah.
and they were trying to like basically the small planes fly over and they spray the crops with
Uh,
pesticides. But it was very much out of like one of those old school awesome films like The Great
yeah.
Wall River. Uh, so long story short, when you're talking about what was your first taste, uh, basically Universal had just bought a company in Australia called Matchbox Pictures, which produces a lot of like good content, TV shows and film.
Mhm.
And uh, they were like, okay, we need content. This looks like a pretty cool short film. This guy
Yeah.
seems like he knows what he's doing. I will be honest with you, I really didn't because I went to this meeting with them and I was so green, Jenna. I was like, just sitting there and they're talking about, like, do you have a feature film version of this script? And I'm kind of like, I really didn't, but I was like, well, I'm
In the
close to
works.
finishing one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and that was kind of them because, yeah, they asked for a feature film script.
Yeah.
I came back to them in 2 weeks with this complete rubbish that I'd written. I think they knew that because they were kind of like, I wrote a screenplay and they were like, yeah, I think this would be better as a TV show. Um,
Oh, okay. You're
so,
like,
so that
"Oh,
was
yeah, of course."
Yeah, like it was a nice way of saying like this is not good enough for us
Oh, I
to
see.
make,
Okay.
but,
Okay,
we'll
got
take
it.
it the
Sorry.
concept. Yeah, we'll buy the rights. So so that was my first sort of forte into it. But it also kind of made me realize, hey, like you got to study it. Like
Mm,
you can't just like
like wing it. Yeah.
yeah. So I went and then studied and really enjoyed that behind the scenes too.
Yeah, that is so cool. That like you're first of all that like you made a short film at the time, and then that like anything happened with it. That's pretty amazing with no, doing everything. That's
Yeah, no,
awesome.
it's wild to think because honestly, Jenna, like it was like even for me, it was like dust storms, flooding, wheat
Yeah.
fields. People say, oh, like everything's closed sometimes in places at like 12 at midnight, or it closes too early. It's like, hey, like everything closes like straight up at like 4 o'clock in the afternoon, five
Oh,
o'clock,
wow, in this
on a
town?
Thursday.
Yeah.
Yeah,
What
so it
was
was
that, sorry, what was that film? Well, is it available or no? Like, could someone
Oh,
watch that or no?
yeah, so the short film's called New York Model Agent,
Okay.
and then, NBC had, started to develop a series called Varelli, which is based on the main character.
Oh
Uh,
my
so
gosh.
yeah.
Yeah. How cool. And it's available to stream and stuff? You can watch it? Or
I'm
not
not
yet? Or no? I mean
Oh, yeah, so what happened, that was, like, a long time ago, so that
right,
kind of
okay.
the high point was getting them to,
Yeah,
um
totally. Okay, cool, cool.
yeah, get me to do my very terrible, like, attempt at a feature film script.
Yeah.
It was exactly 90 pages, so
90? Okay. Did you follow any kinda, like, beat sheet or anything, or you just, like, wrote?
well, that was the thing 'cause the internet wasn't as helpful back then either, so it was like the three-act structure,
Yeah, okay.
that I followed that, but back then it wasn't like people did, for example, like explainer videos on YouTube. It was
Yeah.
like back then it was kind of like these very long, almost
Books.
blogs where people are
Okay.
like, don't make it longer than this, don't make it shorter than like it was,
Just a
yeah.
bunch of rules, and you're just
Yeah,
like,
it was almost
"Okay, how
like
can I squeeze this in?" Yeah.
yeah, it was almost like you had to be super analytical to even understand like these blogs because they
Yeah.
just were very long, detailed instructions. So
Okay. So you came to LA after doing that in Australia, is that right? Or what or okay.
yeah, that was probably the momentum changer for me. Like you talk about how it sort of got
Yeah.
started. It
Yeah,
was
totally.
yeah, I'd sort of done the formal training and then took some time off and then fell into the $200 short film. And it was at that point where it was like, hey, like, I really just love the process. Like, I want to learn more. And,
Yeah.
America does the best filmmaking in the world. So it's like, you can't do the same thing. You can't get the same out of it if you were to stay in Australia too.
Mm. Yeah, okay. Okay, so you came here and then was so okay, so jumping into like what is your process now? So if you do you write most of the stuff you produce as well or a mix? Like because I know you're a producer with the production company, Mogul, is that correct? The
Right,
pronunciation?
right.
Okay. Yeah, so how did you start working with Mogul or and what's your process now? Do you normally yeah, are you normally writing what you produce or like is it a mix?
I feel like, I guess, in a dream scenario, like, you could come up with a great pitch or concept and then go and plug into a writer that just lives and breathes writing and
Mm,
form a partnership that way. But I think the thing that works really well for me at the moment is writing as much as I can,
okay.
getting like a
Cool.
first pass out there, say with a feature
Totally.
film, and then taking it to like someone who's very very good. And it doesn't have to be someone that's repped at CAA and works with the studios. Like I find there's some spectacular writers out
Yeah.
there, who know what like you're supposed to be doing, like really tightening it up, especially if it's like a
Mm,
comedy or if it's a drama, and tightening that script up so that, let's say you give them the shell, like 95 pages or 90
yeah.
pages, and then they kind of go in there and say, hey, like we need to tighten up the first act, we really need to make it specific, or
Yeah.
this character, I feel like he's not necessary, let's lose this character and let's extend the love interest or whoever it is in the
Mhm.
second act. So I think the best way I would find is, yeah, like write as much as you can and then pass it on to like an experienced writer or someone to just flush it out, to finish it off, and
Totally.
then send it off to someone to either get funding or to get it optioned. So that way you're kind of you give it to someone in a place that it's how to check. It's like it's being checked by someone.
Yeah. So, do you tend to work with so when you say like pass it to writer, producer, at this point, do you tend to work with like the same people or you're still or does it change? Like does it change? Are you still yeah. Do you
There-
tend to collaborate with the same people consistently?
There's a couple of really good people I love working with, and I've actually
Okay.
kind of worked with them a couple of times where
Okay.
it's like
Cool.
I've seen their careers sort of really take off.
Mhm.
Just being around them and friends, and it's like now to get them to do my work, it's like it's like, well, I'm working on this Marvel film and then I'm doing rewrites for over here. Like they've done really well.
Yeah.
Um, but I think the process. I would say is you also like, and you know as well, Jenna, like Hollywood, there's so many different flavors on the menu. Like,
Mm,
as far as I think there's people out there that market themselves really well in LA, but they're not actually the real deal. Like,
okay.
they'll spend 99% of their time just trying to look like they know what they're doing, whether it be on
Look
social
like
or
the real deal. Yeah.
yeah. And then you have other people that it's almost like they're really hard to find and they're through word of mouth or maybe they're through your agency. And they're the other end of the spectrum. They don't really market themselves, but they're exceptional at whatever
Mm,
they kind of love doing. So I think sometimes you've got that trial and error because I know I've been stuck a couple of times with on the writing side of things. It's like, people say they love writing, but it's kind of like they work a different process. Like they work incredibly
mm.
slow, or they only like working on their own projects because maybe they had a bad experience. So there's a little bit of
Yeah,
that. It's
to
like
be
a shoe.
aware of.
Yeah, sometimes you have to try on a few different shoes to see which one fits when
Yeah.
you're working with someone.
Yeah, totally. So, for you, James, what's your process like? How do you decide what ideas to pursue, if that makes sense? Like what kinds of stories do you like to tell? And then when you get an idea, what's your process? Like you just start, like to what extent do you outline? And then what's kind of your writing process
I think it's got to be like a passion to get the writing,
going? Yeah.
going. Yeah, and I'd be interested to hear your perspective as well, like what your process is, because I feel like for me, it's like you get pockets of time and you can really plug in and focus.
Yeah.
And sometimes, like, your year, it just tends to be like a task list where it's like you're so busy, it's hard to find that creative time. But
Yeah.
I'd say, like, I'm a huge Farley Brothers fan. So, that sort of comedy, Dumb and Dumber, Something About
Yeah.
Mary, Shallow Hal. And I just love old school sort of Hollywood movies where
Mm.
they don't cut every 3 seconds. It's like back in the day of James Dean, Marlon Brando. It's like they'd leave the camera running for like 2-3 minutes, and actors had to hit their marks. They had to every
Yeah.
time nail it. And I think when you're shooting in a really rare location, like they did with Dances with Wolves, it's like when you show that space and you leave the camera on and you don't like cut, 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 cut every couple of seconds, sometimes these films are really, really powerful. So not all films can work like that, but I
Right.
feel like
But
sometimes when you see a film and you kind of walk out of seeing it and you're like, wow, like that film's kind of, I was really in that. Like it took me away from reality.
yeah.
I think sometimes it's also because they let the film breathe and they let you come in the way they shoot it. So I'd say they're a huge drive. I mean, Catherine Bigelow, she's an amazing director. Obviously, there's the list goes on.
Yeah.
But what about you? Like, how do you find, first of all, like the who's your inspiration and what's your process?
Yeah. So I think it's like I guess it's varied. I tend to I guess write like dramedy, like comedy and drama and like somewhere in there. And sometimes it's often based on like little things in real life that'll spark this whole idea. And sometimes based on, like like a lot of things that I know at this point so far writing wise. Um like specific experiences and then it just like goes on and like builds.
Well, that
Um, yeah.
yes,
Yeah, yeah.
your own experiences I find are amazing. Like, even just it's just learning how to pick up on them and be like, hey, like, you know, because everyone's
Yeah.
always in a rush.
Yeah, totally. And then there's times where you can get to like a certain point in the story, like not even before writing, like outlining. And then it's like you just, I mean, this happens all but like it happens all the time and you just get like stuck. And then it's like, how do you get out of that? Like, how does, especially with endings, I find it's hard to like know because it's decision making at some point. It's like it could go, this
Right,
could happen, this could happen, this could happen, which is the strongest. I don't necessarily know like what the strongest is, like because why? Like you can do endless things. So I'm always fascinated to hear like how people figure that out. But I think organically things do, when a thing just like clicks, like when it just instinctually feels like that's it.
right.
Yeah, but like those moments aren't, it's not like a conscious stream of like perfect inspiration. It's often like, you know,
No,
like
well,
messy.
I can totally relate because I think I like for me, I think too, like a lot of people, it's like their sphere of influence. So it's like,
Mm.
um, and I'm throwing this out there, but it's like if your environment, like you work at a golf course, it's like it's easier for you to write a golf movie because you can kind of picture
Yeah, because you have all
it.
that, like, experience. Yeah.
Yeah, which like because a lot of people, I know a lot of people are like, "Oh, great, like another web series or another series about 4 roommates in LA that wanna make it in Hollywood." Like, and I've seen them as well. Like I've seen there's so many of them
Yeah.
where people are like, "Hey, I've got an idea for a TV show. It's about 4 actors that live in Hollywood." But it's not that that's not a bad idea. It's just that's the people that are writing that or the people
Yeah.
coming up with it, they're probably in that. They're probably,
Yeah.
roommates with
Totally.
4 actors and it's like you're writing about where you are. And I think
Yeah.
that's sometimes really interesting to see. It's also when people have a really weird idea, especially like a horror movie, or it's like, someone's writing about, bodies in a basement and things. It's like, geez, like I don't know what your environment is because I've read some. You've probably read some scripts too, where you're reading it. It's like, wow, this is
Like, how did
really
you
next
come
level.
up
Even
with
yeah,
this? Yeah,
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 even for horror
totally.
movies, like, what's your sphere of influence?
Yeah, completely. Yeah, and then there's people that come up with, like, things that seem totally unrelated, seemingly, because it's, like, maybe very high concept or, like, it's about something so specific, and I always think that's amazing, but I think, like, the bottom line is you can write about anything that you can write about because it's just like everything has like this universal human truth. And if you click into that, like it is your own experience, even if it's like disguised as something so esoteric, you know? There's just
Exactly.
something we can all, yeah, like that's how stories work. Like that's why we relate to anyone else's story, even if it's like so far removed from you. Yeah, nothing's really that like, yeah, even if you put a bunch of crazy stuff on top of it.
Right. Well, I think
Yeah.
that's why, yeah, I mean, sci-fi movies are so cool, and it's like I
Yeah.
think people are lending their perspective to how they view the space and the moon and the future.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, completely. So you gravitate towards comedy, it sounds like writing-wise?
if I had a choice, I'd love to do comedy,
Okay,
uh,
cool.
but it's like in LA, it's like it's hard to it's rare to find the time to work on something you're really passionate about. It's often your other stories are great, but you're kind of working in a team. It can't just be all about your
Yeah.
own sort of objective.
Yeah, so in terms of working with a team, like, what's that yeah, explain a bit what that collaboration looks like, how does it work? Like, just yeah, like, the different even, like, the different roles and how you, um, yeah, like, what that whole yeah, like, what that whole thing looks like how you take an idea, write it, develop it, and then, like, who are the different moving parts in that, you know?
Well, one of the things I think I've learned, and maybe this is just like from my experience, but they're making technology so rapidly
Mm,
increasing. Like before, it's like pretty much you could get like for example like a Panavision camera and a film crew, and the cheapest film you could make 10 years
yeah,
ago, which would be quality. The cheapest film you could make would maybe it's going to be 500,000 to 1 million at the minimum.
mm,
Now it's like with camera editing, they're really kind of like allowing someone to wear multiple hats. Like if you can edit, color grade, plus hypothetically, act, it's like, that's a huge benefit because then you only need to hire a cinematographer and the sound and things. But I think one thing for me is just always remembering is it's with technology really rapidly making it so that you need less and less people to make a film. You need to collaborate, like even just to tell the story correctly.
yeah,
Because I mean, I've been on a couple of films where it's like the director has worn multiple hats, and sometimes it's because that's the way they operate. Like they've said, like, hey, like you know, I like doing my own stuff. I know how I want it edited, all those
mm,
things, but you kind of hit like a level where the film can't actually grow. Like unless you've got like a proper team, like you've got like good sound, you've got good
yeah,
people doing it. You just can't hit that next level, not at the moment. So I think
yeah,
I mean, just to circle back to your question, I think it's collaborating with people is part of the excitement, and it can
Yeah.
also be the challenge because obviously creative people tend to be, very headstrong. And for example, you've been on film sets where it's like the cinematographer is telling the director, how to shoot it, or the
You're
first
just like
AD is yeah, or the first
you're
AD
just
is
like
directing the
standing there like,
actors.
"Okay, what are we doing?"
Yeah, so that's part of the I think that's part of the yeah, like sometimes people maybe they've been scarred and that's why they prefer working on their own. But I think yeah, collaboration is key to like scaling a business. You need to bring on people more
Yeah.
and more to help the business grow, even with technology.
Yeah, yeah, completely, and I love what you said, it's a good reminder too to always it's valuable to learn yourself these different skills, like, what you just said, like editing, color grading, all of the above, and even if you don't end up obviously, it's valuable for yourself, like, to make work yourself, but even if you don't end up using it for that, just to understand the whole process and everyone else's roles is
So
very
true. Yeah,
valuable, it's
that
amazing.
is so true, isn't it? Because
Yeah, to
I think
relate.
it's that thing too where it's like if you understand the process, even if you're not technically doing the color grade, the communication between you and the colorist is so much faster, so much smoother,
Yeah,
because you're
yeah.
speaking the same language.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's so true. It reminds me, like I've had some things, like literally on my list, like editing, for instance, and I wanted to learn a different program, and now and you like reminded me, like, what happened to that? Why didn't I do that?
Well,
Like I should learn that. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, I mean, finding the time, like, in today's world, it's like that's the hard part too,
I
so
know. Time is. I know.
yeah.
Yeah. So acting wise, let's shift a little to acting. Do you have like a favorite way to work in terms of I think about this a lot, like in terms of very technical, where it's like there's some directors that work very technically, and it's like you have to be very like specifically hit a specific mark. Okay, that's pretty common, but like even more technical, like be looking here when you say this line and this word and whatever. And then on the other side of the spectrum, there's more improv based and like room to just like play. What's your do you gravitate towards anything specific? Do you have like a favorite kind of style of working or what's
I
your
think that
thing?
I think you hit it on the head really well. Like it's those directors that micromanage you to a
Mm.
point where it's like put your head up, you laugh here, you don't laugh, like, and they kind of make it mechanical. Whereas if a director kind of gives you that freedom to say, hey, like I trust your choices,
Totally.
you're hitting the objective. Let's let this scene breathe. Like I don't want to
Yeah.
kind of hinder you. Uh, and I mean, I think it's you can't really choose your director, but I think I guess depending if it's TV and they're really really push for time, they may just say, hey, like we just want the dialogue down and
Yeah.
we're on
Yeah.
such a rush here, and then other times it can be where I guess it depends as well, like
Yeah, you're 100% right. It just depends on the project, the people, timeline. That's a huge thing. Like
yeah.
if something has to be done, like
I
it has to just,
I
yeah, like
did I
moving
did
on.
I think my horror experience would be when you're talking about directors is that this was like I can say it now because back then it was kind of hard to say it till the it was a show on TV. It's a good show. Um, Basically, my role in it was basically the news reporter over a couple of episodes,
Okay.
and
Cool.
so that there as this big arcing story of like a takeover is happening, they're cutting to this news reporter,
Mhm.
live and then in the studio. And they shot so basically I had about 9 monologues
Oh,
nonstop
wow.
in a
Okay.
studio as
Yeah.
this newscaster. Very dialogue driven show. And I just this when you're talking about like a bad experience, I just remember my agent at the time was away and she's like, don't worry, so and so's covering for me for this week. You'll get your call sheet when
Okay.
you start this day. Um, and 9 monologues. So I'm learning like there's no tomorrow. I'm
Yeah.
learning these monologues, which is like, and it makes no sense because the show is very dialogue driven and you don't get much story to actually like to pick up on. So I've learned these monologues. So it's about 30 pages, like
Wow.
added up.
Yeah.
And
Oh,
then
wait, and how long did you have to learn that out of curiosity?
so they said, okay, so we're gonna like they booked out a TV studio and we're gonna start basically shooting the monologues one after the other.
Okay.
Because we
Oh,
and
okay.
then if we get into penalty, we run out of time, which we may do because they were actually using a TV studio. Then we're going to go for the next day, and then that was hopefully going to take care of like all they're going to interweave it into a couple of episodes.
Okay.
So I'm just banging it out there. I'm just like totally learning 30 pages. It's not happening. And then my call sheet doesn't come. And because my agent's away and the person covering was very,
God,
very
you're giving me
slow,
anxiety just listening to this.
they
Yeah.
didn't they didn't tell me that the producers had decided those out of those nine monologues, which like I said are like 3 or 4 pages each.
Yeah.
They didn't tell me that the producers had decided to make new monologues, like
Oh.
new dialogue.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I'd
of
learned
course. You're
30.
learning, like, some old version draft.
Yeah, and I'm like stressing like there's no tomorrow. Like I'm on set in like 6 hours. I know four of these monologues, and the other five I can't remember to save my life. And then and then I get an email like early in the morning saying, "Oh, here's the correct monologues. Here's the correct breaking story pieces,
Yeah.
and you learn these instead." So
Oh, okay.
I just remember getting to set, and I'm still feeling like I can only remember like 12 pages or whatever. It's intense. Then I get there, and again, my agent being away, the production manager or the first AD, I can't remember, came up to me and goes, "Oh, James, great. So we've got the teleprompter set up, and we've got the scene lit, ready to go." They had a teleprompter, so
Oh,
all this
yeah.
time,
Got it.
and they hadn't said it all that.
Yeah.
So I had this false sense of security, and it got really weird, Jenna, because the director had been shooting earlier that week, and he ran out of time. Like he was still at another set, and the
Oh.
crew had set the shot up, and they'd set the teleprompter up so far away because no one was there, that not even like no one could see it. It was like
Oh.
setting a teleprompter up like the other side of the 405 freeway. Like it
Yeah,
was a
great.
long distance,
Yeah.
and so yeah, so then I couldn't use the teleprompter. So it was like this full sense of like I need to learn the lines. I don't. Then I get to set, and it's fine. There's going to be the teleprompter, and then it's like, oh no, there's not. Let's get the old way of doing it. Oh, by the way, we're pressed for time. The director's going to be here anytime. So yeah, that was a good learning curve.
Totally. And so, like, how did, it turn out? Not even the result, like, how was the experience? How did the experience turn out? Like,
Well,
I know you
it,
kind of
it's
said, obviously, I don't think not great,
it
but
was like it was so like this thing where it was like like again, you're doing the best you can, and I kind of
yeah,
scraped
yeah.
through. I scraped through, and the one thing I think was helpful is just remembering that, yeah, like they're going to cut to other things at the same time, so it's like
Yeah,
you've got
they'll
that
mhm.
flexibility to kind of not be on point. But yeah, it was. I mean, again, people talk about like being prepared for the unprepared. Um,
Yeah, I love that. That's very true.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Um,
intense.
yeah, like there's a lot of I mean, that's a great learning experience for sure, you know? There's a lot of good things in there. But you're right, like in editing, it becomes what it's gonna become, like they'll make it, whatever. Um, and also sometimes you just like sometimes you just really don't have didn't have the time to that you need. And so it's like, what are you doing from there, and you work from that and you just do your best, and then you have to, like, let it go, which is very hard to do. So
Right.
yeah.
Well, that's where I mean, I think for myself, I was very lucky because I had some really good teachers when I was learning that at the
Yeah.
time you don't really think, oh, like that, whatever. And then you kind of realize, and one of them was, if you can get really good at working when it's uncomfortable and
Yeah.
not having this idea of the acting industry is like, oh, you get your trailer and it's red carpets and it's this really fun experience. It's like, you're more than likely going to be working with at least one of your hands tied behind your back, meaning, everyone's rushed for time. Maybe your personal life's upside down. Maybe hypothetically they change the scene on you, like an hour before you shoot.
Yeah.
Um, and it's just not getting to that point where some actors, and I think this is maybe reflecting, it's like there's some brilliant actors out there, absolutely brilliant, especially you might have gone to school with them, or you might see them in certain productions, but they're brilliant when it's kind of like a first class ticket. Like, it's brilliant when all you have to do is learn the lines and then perform the scene the next day. But
Yeah.
once it gets to that point where it's like, oh, like I've got to do that and I've got to learn new lines on the day, or this happened, and you actually got to basically plug in and channel all the distractions and just perform. I think a lot of people, they're not the same. And that's kind of like the same with professional sport. Like, there's better golfers than Tiger Woods, but he can live on the road for 11 months of the year, and he can travel and he can do all those things and perform
Yeah.
really well.
Yeah, and just, yeah, like, there's something about, like, that chaos that, like, you can embrace too, like
Exactly. Yeah.
like, there's, like, a freedom and, like, a thing that comes with it sometimes. Sometimes it's just bad, but sometimes it's like, "Okay, this is it. This is what we're doing," like, "Let's see what happens," and, like, it leaves room for, like, really authentic things too.
You're
Yeah,
100% right, yeah, and that's sometimes where the best work happens, because
totally.
you've got that kinda little charge behind you, but, no, everyone's different, personality's different,
Yeah.
so some people like it, some people don't.
Yeah, and it's constant. Yeah, constantly different personalities, different people, so, like, it's all good experience. Like, sometimes if, you could be, like, so frustrated with things sometimes, but if you go into it like, "This is I'm doing this for the experience, like, I'm gonna have this experience, I wanna, if you leave it at that, not attached to any kind of result or way you want it to be or anything, I think that's often the most valuable. Like, I've had things like that even, and then I'm like, "Oh, shoot, this I wanted to do this, and I want to," and you realize things you like after, and then you just, like, default to, "Well, wait, I had the experience," like, that's, like, what I
You sh
did, like, I realized that, and then you go into the next thing with that, like, a different it's like something different because you realize from the thing before that you're frustrated with.
Right,
Yeah.
right, right. Enjoying the ride,
Yeah, that's how you say
like,
that's how you
yeah,
say it succinctly,
enjoying
yeah.
it.
Yeah, totally. Okay, James, I'm gonna ask you just a few random fun questions, alright?
Sure.
Let's see, what is a sound that you really hate or really love? This is so random.
That is kinda like you're the first person that's ever asked that that I can remember.
Really? Okay.
That's a great question, very unique. I'd say probably like thunderstorms or rain would be a
You
great
love.
sound. Yeah.
Okay.
Um,
Amazing.
sound that I don't like is probably the engines turning off in an aeroplane.
Oh,
Happened to me
interesting.
once, yeah, which we nearly crashed. So
Oh
that
my
was probably
god.
like the least favorite sound for good
Was
reason.
that, like, mid-air situation or what?
Oh yeah, no, that was when like you're basically the oxygen masks come down and you're getting into you feel completely helpless, like
Yeah, like,
nothing you
totally
can do, not anyone you can call. Yeah.
okay,
So
wait, so you have to tell a little more now. Like, where are you going from where to where? What year was this? Like,
th- this was uh I'm trying to think what year it was. Uh I was just out of acting school, and they have this budget airline in Australia called Regional Express, or Rex.
okay.
Um, and I hadn't really taken this route before, and they took off in this crazy, crazy storm. It was in the daytime
Oh,
though, like it wasn't at
yeah,
night,
yeah.
and it was a much smaller plane. Like, it had one hostess. It would have had maybe like about 38 people on board max. So
Wow.
smaller plane.
Uh-huh.
And when I say like the engine's turning off, it's like the propellers. It wasn't like a jet engine. So it
Okay.
was
Oh my god, that's
but yeah, basically it was, we were fighting this storm, and it was weird because it was like you could tell that every time, like, these massive like turbulence hits, the plane was either sinking or it felt like it was
so
being
weird.
pushed backwards. just even though it was at full power. So it was like you could tell. And then
Yeah.
suddenly the engine started roaring, and it looked like the guy was trying to climb something, like trying to climb over the top of like we're in clouds, so you couldn't see anything.
Oh
And I
my
remember at that point, that was where it kind of got weird because there was this guy in a suit, and he was sitting like the row kind of like next to me, and there was no one sitting next to me, and there was no one sitting next to him. And I always assumed because he seemed pretty calm for like the opening bit. You know, when you see someone in a suit and you're younger and you think, oh, that's an adult. Like,
He must
you know,
know
if
what
he's
he's
upset, then
doing.
there must be a
Yeah.
problem. But he was kind of cool. Like, he was just drinking coffee. And then I just remember, like, at that point, he kind of looked at me as the same time I looked at him. And his face was like, just like straight up cold. Like, you
Oh,
could see, like, he was worried. And then so the plane basically, it's like the plane tried to go up and it
mm.
stalled because a gust of wind hit, and it was like for some reason the propellers just cut off, and then he just aimed straight down, and we just started plummeting. And it was kind of crazy it's hard to completely articulate everything. But
Yeah,
then
I'm sure.
and then right at the last minute, there was this big roars, like the engine suddenly came on again, and we made this emergency landing. There was, again, it was crazy too, because if you do an emergency landing in this kind of like remote regional airfield during a storm, and it was kind of like the plane was sliding away from the small tarmac,
Yeah. Oh my
and I
god,
didn't
that is
think I didn't think
scary.
we were gonna. I actually thought we were gonna crash on the landing too, because it was like it just felt like the plane was on ice, like it was just like sliding on ice
Wow.
in the air. Um, but yeah, that was kind of wild.
That
So
is wild. Did you make any wait, first of all, where was this? Did you say that yet? You said it was
yeah,
an
it
Australian
was
airline, but
a regional. So I was flying to a place called Dubbo,
okay.
which is like a smaller town. Which again, it was kind of in the middle of nowhere. Um,
Okay. From
but
where? From Sydney?
yeah, so just out of Sydney. So I live
Okay.
in Sydney. I was living in Sydney, and I was flying out of Sydney to
Okay.
this airport. And
Okay, got it.
yeah, so
Yeah. That's crazy. Did you make any so you mentioned that one guy, what was kinda like the energy for everyone? Like, I'm just curious because you always see this kind of thing
y-
depicted and it's like you well, what like, what was it actually like?
my
Like
last impression is because when we landed, they did the whole like evacuate, evacuate,
oh, okay.
and like trust me, you don't tell me I wanted to get the hell off that plane. Like everyone wanted to get off that
Yeah.
plane. But as I was leaving, like, and it was a small plane, like I said, there was this one lady, and I'd say she would have been like in her 50s, and she'd been in that brace position where you're holding onto the back of the chair,
Yeah.
and she wouldn't let go. And I remember as like everyone's leaving, like as everyone's coming out, the hostess was kind of yelling at her, saying like, "You must leave," and
Yeah.
she couldn't. Like
Interesting.
she'd locked up, like she'd locked her hands with
Yeah.
shock. And it was like at that point, it was like, you know, how people deal with different situations. Sometimes
Yeah, I was
people put
just
down,
thinking
sometimes
that.
people are like, and I kind of remember like, because they were saying like, just go. And I was looking behind. Um, and it was like, yeah, like she obviously eventually came out, but she was the one that wouldn't leave.
Yeah.
It had just been too much of a sort of experience.
Yeah, that's so interesting because like you and a lot of people wanted to get off right away, and then there's and then there's people like who like couldn't get off. That's so
Yeah.
interesting.
It
It
was like a
reminds you
state of
like
shock. Yeah.
yeah, I like it reminds you with everything, like not to always bring it back, but like material we get and stuff. There's no right way, like you like if you got I don't know, like if you got that sort of thing as like an audition or sides and a lot of people think like, "Oh, you would be like has to be like this or whatever," but it's not true. Like you don't know how people like who's to say how it goes, you know?
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And exactly, and everyone is made different, and so you can't criticize either, like, this idea of, like, "Oh, this person couldn't get off the plane." It's like, you have no idea what she'd been through in the past, you had no
Yeah.
idea what she'd
Totally.
had that morning, like, maybe it was all too much, like, you know, she could have been suddenly filed for divorce or something, and it was, like, too much to handle, so it's
Yeah.
I think everyone's got their own journey.
Yeah, totally. All right, if you were a professional athlete, what sport would you play?
Definitely surfing. I
Oh,
absolutely
oh, okay.
love surfing, yeah.
Yeah.
So
Awesome. Do you surf still, like, in California?
Yeah, like California's got some great waves. You just have to get a little bit out of LA.
Yeah.
So there's some great spots in Malibu. I'm Malibu Pier, Surfrider.
Yeah.
There's a great spot like Little Doom's really good.
Okay, I
Uh,
know all these. Yeah.
yeah, it's great. The difference is I think in Australia there's less to do, so people really embrace the beach from a young
Okay,
age.
right.
In
Right, right.
California, I feel like there is like a lot going on. So it's like if you don't live near the beach, it's
Yeah.
not like you're looking to go to the beach every weekend.
Yeah. Yeah. I
So
think there are some people here though that well, I mean, of course, but like that surf every morning because like you pass it in the morning and there's always a huge group of surfers. Like I'm
right,
like, are those the same people every day that come or is it like always new? It's obviously probably a mix, but I think definitely people get up and they just like go surf.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because in Sydney there's a suburb called Newport Beach, um,
Oh, no way.
and it's on the northern
Yeah.
beaches, which I think is very similar to kind of like the OC and Newport Beach,
Yeah, yeah. How
and
weird.
the lifestyles are very similar. You're exactly right. It's like, and that yeah, used to be me in growing up, like as a
Oh,
as a
wow.
kid, like it's
That's
like
awesome.
going for early surfs before school and
Yeah.
how much time have you got before you have to get like the bus. Like it was like that lifestyle. There's something really nice about it. As I got an adult, I haven't been able to
As
continue doing that unfortunately,
consistently.
but
Yeah,
yeah, surfing's amazing.
that is amazing. Okay, and then this podcast is called Behind the Now, but I always like to bring it back to how do you be the now? And that's up to your interpretation. So, like, how do you be present if that's how you interpret it, but like totally up to you.
I think the best way is to, I would say, and maybe I'm answering your question too. Let me know if I'm off course, but uh, there's moments in time that happen to you like every day where you can see someone who's less fortunate than you. And I think everyone has got such an ego or they're worried about these ridiculous things like, social media or that person owns this car and I don't have
Mhm.
that car. And it's like, if there's just moments that you can go back and realize like you are so lucky.
Yeah.
There was a moment for me years ago in Los Angeles when I took an Uber from Santa Monica to West Hollywood, and there was a nurse who worked at UCLA Medical. He was driving the Uber, and he drove Uber just to give his money to the kids.
Mm.
Um, so he'd work all day helping these sick kids, and then at night he'd drive Uber when he had a spare chance and donate that money anonymously, so they didn't know it was
Yeah.
him at work. And he explained to me because I thought like at the time I was like, no, there's got to be an angle. Like you're, and this is me. Like again, I hate to double check people, but it was like it just seemed such a pure and beautiful thing this
Yeah.
guy was doing to help children and sick kids especially. But he's like, no, he's like, hey, I where I grew up, getting the chance to make a decision, like getting a chance to say, hey, after work, I have an opportunity to drive if I want to, or have an opportunity, to go down to the pier, or like
Yeah.
he never had that. And it's like people think, oh, like my life's so terrible, I've got this problem and this problem. It's like that moment there was very strong for me because it's like this guy is coming from a place where, he was so poor growing up that like the only thing he could do was survival mode. And it was
Yeah.
like, I think there's something really nice about just remembering like how lucky you are. And that sets everything into perspective rather than
Yeah.
worrying about your Instagram, and that's going to be the thing that puts you into perspective.
Yeah, completely. I really love that. It is so true. Like, how many times are you worried about something or anxious about something? And like, as I sometimes think this, and then you're like, not like you're kind of like, you can just get over yourself, like this thing really. And like, usually it's a privilege to even be worried about like that thing that you're worried about, like to have that sort of decision to make or to one, like, you have the time to like have those thoughts of like what should I do about this, there's like choice, so you
Exactly.
just brought up, like, it's so interesting that so I love that. That's really beautiful. It's true.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel like in LA, especially where you have you have a lot of distractions, and it's like
Yeah.
it's always good to get to that present point with what really matters.
Yeah, totally. And also just being healthy is massive. Like we don't even understand even like we understand so little about how the body works, for instance, and that we just like take for granted until you hurt your toe or something so minor and you kind of like affects everything, you know? And you're like,
Yeah,
and it's crazy. It's like, oh, this toe I never think about, like, or whatever it is. And it's like, that's all this stuff is going right all of the time for you that we don't even acknowledge most of the time until you get some little reminder about it, you know?
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
Can't do
Yeah.
anything without your health. It's
Totally. I
yeah.
just, yeah, I love what you brought up. That's really amazing. And then, James, where can our listeners find you or see your work or connect with you? How can they connect and watch your stuff?
I would say anything you see on IMDb that looks interesting. Maybe just Google, where to watch, or I
Cool.
think on IMDb, like it sort of comes up where it's out. That might be most helpful.
Okay.
And
Perfect.
yeah, I mean, if anyone ever wants to connect, probably my best would be James Pratt 7 at Instagram.
Okay. Perfect.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. You're so insightful and it's been so awesome talking to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Jenna. Yeah, you've been awesome. Great conversation.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. I'm your host, Jenna Malatsky, and this episode was edited by Jacob Mammen. Make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube at jenna.malatsky and on Spotify and Apple Podcasts at Behind the Now with Jenna Malatsky.